From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Ahead today, K-State's Glynn Tonsor with this week's cattle market segment. In addition to reviewing last week's cattle price trends, Glynn will pass along findings from his new survey of beef consumers on the advent of a COVID vaccine being available and how that would likely impact their dining activity at restaurants. Also today, from the latest Cattle Chat podcast out of the Beef Cattle Institute at K-State, thoughts on gleaning the returns to value-added calves at sale time. K-State's Brad White, Bob Weaber, and Bob Larson contributing to that discussion. And Jeff Wickman with this week's 4-H segment as he talks with K-State's Beth Hinshaw about making new 4-H members feel welcome. All of that ahead on this Agriculture Today.
A social distancing tip.
Putting distance between yourself and others is critical to slowing the spread of coronavirus. So here are ways to stay in contact without the physical contact part. Call, send a text, set up a video conference, post on social media, dedicate a song on the radio. If you have symptoms of fever, dry cough, and shortness of breath, call your healthcare provider before going to their office. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part, because we're all #alone together. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Thanks for listening in once again to this Agriculture Today. The cattle markets are first up today, as always on a Monday, with Glynn Tonsor aboard once more, livestock economist, K-State Research and Extension. He has some revealing new information on beef demand, and we'll get into that in just a few moments, Glynn. But the trading week just passed was relatively calm, was it not?
It was. There is a little bit of a mixed bag of effect as the corn market continues to rally. That shows up as a differential impact in the market. So let's just break it down a little bit. The October live cattle contract closed at 110. It was up about $2 for the week. We look over at feeder cattle. It's a mixed bag. The heavier weight groups in particular, AMS called the Pratt market, the 6 to 9 weights, up $7, which is a strong improvement of prior week. But there's a flat price weight slide. So two specific lots I'll note here is 84 head weighing 582, sold for 151. A bigger lot, 149 head that weighed 837 pounds. So again, that's 250 pounds heavier, weighed 149. So we're barely down. And neither one of those had claims with them or whatever other reasons for that. But I think we're starting to see the impact of the corn market show up here a little bit. October feeder cattle contract was 138, down about $1.50 for the week there. I'm alluding to corn. The December CME corn contract's up 30 cents per bushel just here in the month of October so far. I don't know if that's going to continue, of course, the next few weeks. But what's relevant there is we tend to beat up the feeder cattle market relative to the live cattle market when corn gets more expensive. And we're seeing some signals of that. If this persists, we'll see that more and more, particularly the lighter weight calves as the fall run continues. That increase in corn prices is bearish effect on the feeder cattle market.
And let's visit a second about the retail beef trade this past week. It's on the downturn, you say.
Yeah, so the wholesale choice cutout came in about $2.15, down $3. Select was beat up more, closer to about $6. So yes, the bearish tone is showing up there. At least some comments this past week. COVID cases are up. There's renewed concerns about slowdown economic activity and so forth. There's other reasons to be optimistic, but there have been renewed concerns about closures and so forth that probably are showing up in that marketplace. So keep your eye on that. Good news, and I don't know how many more weeks we'll be able to say this, but we continue to run at very strong processing levels. And probably for the rest of 2020, I'm going to make a point to highlight this in every interview, is the initial estimates so far for this week are 665,000 federal inspected cattle slaughter. That's up compared to 651 the prior week and up notably 645 a year ago. There is increasing chatter. This is the time of year where sometimes we take a shift off to do some maintenance in the plants and so forth. These facilities have been ran hard for several months now, so the need to do that is probably even greater than normal. So look for, at some point, that week-over-week number to come down as we take a break in some of these facilities. I remain optimistic that we won't have anywhere near the pullback we did back in April and May. Lots of investment, learning about COVID itself, PPE interventions and so forth ought to help us sustain high volumes. But we do have to do some maintenance work for the industry as a whole, and I suspect we'll see that effect in the weeks ahead.
All right. Well, our listeners will recall that you maintain what's called the Meat Demand Monitor. You pull together information from consumers out there on where we stand with beef and other meat demand. And the September edition of that monitor has been posted. Glynn, you might give us the quick synopsis of what it says.
Yeah, the punchline would be, as you said, every month we get a look at two particular beef products. So ribeye steak and then ground beef, just to represent the broader steak category, and of course ground beef on its own. And we do it separately for retail and food service. On the retail or grocery store side of things, demand for both those products was down slightly, but literally pennies. So basically flat down just a little bit from August levels. And then when we go to food service, the pullbacks were stronger. And that's consistent with what I was alluding to earlier is foot traffic and general activity around the country has stepped back a little bit over the last month. And foot traffic through restaurants, I think, is part of that story. And that demand measure would reaffirm that. Going forward, going into the fall, there's certainly a lot of commentary about, the restaurants that have been able to do curbside, not just drive-through curbside, but like temporary bring out the furnace and you sit outside, bought some time in the cooler parts of our country so far. But as we get into the winter, those that aren't comfortable sitting in a traditional dine-in setting in the restaurant where it's full heat and so forth could certainly be a bearish effect on the food service channel. I hope not to see that in the months ahead, but we certainly need to monitor that.
And you added something extra in the latest monitor. This was inquiring about what would happen if, in fact, a vaccine were developed and distributed in this country for COVID-19, as far as people's tendencies to frequent restaurants.
Yes. So, since COVID has hit the U.S., there's been commentary about developing a vaccine. That topic isn't new, but it is front and center of a lot of current debates. Lots of uncertainty about, A, will we have one? B, when will it come out, right? Timing before or after November 3rd or not, and so forth is all part of that general discussion. So what I wanted to know was, A, what's the public's expectation on when a vaccine will be available to them? And the summary point here would be is almost 40% indicate they think they will have one available to themselves in the first quarter of 2021, so January through March. To be determined. I don't know if that's optimistic or pessimistic. I'm not here to say that either way. But that is telling. That's a sizable part of the population that thinks that. To our discussion today here, the most important part is I follow that up with, once a vaccine is available, what's going to be your change in behavior, if any, in a food service sense? So more narrowly, I asked, how are you going to change your willingness to sit down, dine in on site at a restaurant? And 19% say they immediately will have more sit down on site restaurant meals. A full 32% say they'll make no change. And for those that are good at math, that leaves basically 50% that say, yeah, they're going to slowly go back to consuming more. So there's some nuggets for all parties in that story. If you're a restaurant operator out there hoping to get more foot traffic, the vaccine might bring you, let's say, 20% of the public real quick and some others thereafter. At the same time, if you're a retailer who has been benefiting from the shift to consuming more at home, there's at least a third that say this would not have an impact on them. They're going to probably remain low volume traffickers through the restaurant channel. So there's a ray of optimism for the food service channel in there if you can target those that are comfortable and take the vaccine and maybe adjust behavior because of it. But there's also an ongoing opportunity for retailers, for those that are signaling they're not going to change their behavior.
Those are interesting numbers. As you read them, what do they say about our beef demand prospects ahead at that retail restaurant level, Glynn?
So break that down by product. I'm concerned about loin and moreover high-end steak demand going through the winter. So traditionally, we rely on restaurant channel, white tablecloth, doing business to move a lot of that product and get a higher value for it. Going into the winter, and maybe a third of the public saying, even with a vaccine, I won't return to a large volume of restaurant traffic, makes me concerned on the steak front for the winter. Now, conversely, ground beef demand, there's some staying power of consumer demand embedded in that story. Go back to April, we had this huge boost in ground beef demand because people are comfortable with it. You can freeze it. You can eat it direct. It's on a patty. It's an ingredient. It's a very versatile product that a lot are comfortable with. Going through the winter, we may actually see that renewed interest sustain beef demand overall. So what's the net of ground beef demand strength and weakness on steak demand is really what I think we'll be watching in the months ahead.
All of this information in his latest Meat Demand Monitor that Glynn has posted on the agmanager.info website. Get a glance at that. Something else, Glynn, that you've also put up recently on Ag Manager, beef labeling observations and looking at such things as country of origin labeling, where we stand. What was behind that?
Yeah, so South Dakota Farm Bureau has had a webinar-based series called Pasture to Plate. And a couple weeks ago now, at this point, I was able to be one of the guest speakers, and I was asked to speak about beef labeling. A couple of the nuggets, and my slides from that talk are on agmanager.info. Folks are welcome to go look at that. But the punchline I was trying to impress on those listeners was there's an ever-going evolution of what is labeling. So what is mandated and not. We now have mandated support behind organic programs. We now have nutrition facts on food products, those kind of things. And then I spent probably half that evening's webinar talking specifically about MCOOL, so mandatory country of origin labeling. There's renewed interest in bringing back MCOOL. For some, that never went away, but the pandemic has reinforced that in certain circles. So I was simply trying to highlight the economic research that I and others have done on the topic to kind of remind us of what's been done, what's the history, what the net economic research to date was on it. And I was just trying to impress that on our listeners.
The take-home nugget, you hit upon it, the net economics of beef labeling, whether it be MCOOL or something else, and you want folks to understand the realities of those.
Yeah, so our research, and I say our because I have multiple research collaborators across multiple projects on that particular statement, is the net economic impact of a mandatory country of origin labeling policy is negative in our assessment. So we know there's cost, and it comes with tracking and labeling that applies to all covered products. You need a consumer demand boost to offset that for there to be a net positive benefit cost. And we don't find evidence of that net gain because there's not evidence of demand strength to offset those costs. That's the punchline of our past work. You know, there's always room to reevaluate that, and there's certainly room for voluntary labeling of certain products to certain consumers. And I don't ever speak against that. I'm all for voluntary efforts in niche markets and new brands, and there's room for those opportunities. But my word of caution is mandating imposes cost on the entire system, and I think we need to remember that.
Once more, you can review his presentation on that topic, beef labeling, at agmanager.info likewise. Very handy to find. As always, Glynn, thanks for all of this input. We will talk again very soon.
Thanks for having me on, Eric.
Livestock economist Glynn Tonsor, K-State Research and Extension, opening up this Agriculture Today with the weekly cattle market segment, and you're listening to the K-State Radio Network.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
Next up for you on Agriculture Today, another exchange of thoughts by the team at the Beef Cattle Institute here at Kansas State University. They get together each week to present the BCI Cattle Chat podcast. And on the latest edition, a number of items were on the agenda, including these two, capturing the added health and genetic value of calves at sale time, and trends in feedlot cattle death losses. Here are, in order, K-State veterinarians Brad White and Bob Larson, and cow-calf specialist Bob Weaber.
It's that time of year we think about marketing calves, so we're going to talk about not just value added, we're going to talk about value capture. So whether that's genetic or health or how, if we've done good things to the calves, how do we get that value back out? I will ask you guys, Bob and Bob on the health side and Bob on the genetic side. There's lots of things we do to add value to calves that really make a difference. Both genetic improvements, preconditioning programs, things to prepare those calves for the next phase of their life. Do you see people always get the value back out of them that they put into them? And if not, why not?
Yeah, some of the things we've talked about in some recent podcasts, getting those calves vaccinated, castrated, dewormed, ready for the next phase of life. Those are all things that really make that calf more likely to be healthy, more likely to perform well. But if I don't tell anyone about that, they're going to assume, that they need to consider a higher risk animal than what I'm necessarily selling. And so the marketing side of that, and I've seen some work coming out of K-State's Ag Econ department, looking at some predictors of ranch profitability, and average sale price is a big driver for the higher profit ranches. And, on any given year, we're all in the same price environment. So no one really gets to, break completely out of the price environment of a particular marketing window. But people that are more profitable find ways to add a few dollars here and there or capture a few dollars here and there. Health is one way. So not only selling the calf, but selling the information, selling the story is an important part of that.
Absolutely. And I think you're right, but I'll make a distinction in what you said. You can add a few dollars of value, but you have to have a system in place to capture those dollars back, right? Because we can give them vaccinations. We can buy better bulls. It's pretty straightforward. Can we capture those dollars back? What do you see, Bob, on the genetic side?
Yeah, I think genetics matter, obviously, and I think really in sort of two spaces. One's, obviously the performance of those calves to create pounds of calf weaned as part of your paycheck formula, right? So figuring out how to optimize cows in your production environment so that they're really reproductively efficient and mate those cows to bulls that provide good marketing value and performance of those calves, both to, whatever your marketing endpoint is really. So get that selection decision to endpoint aligned is really important. And then make sure, if you spend extra money on genetics, one of the ways to capture value is retain ownership on those. If you've made good breeding and marketing decisions, owning them further in the chain typically provides you more opportunity to capture value back. But if you're still in a situation where you have to sell calves at weaning time, and make sure that you spend some of your marketing investment, if you will, in terms of time, providing information about, we bought XYZ bulls from this premier breeder, and here's what their genetic profile was. Particularly in environments like video auctions and so forth, those either breeder or trait designations can really add some value and confidence to the buyers that are buying your calves.
So you guys have given me kind of two ways if I want to go down this path. Is one, I could transfer information, is what Bob talked about, and then I could also retain ownership, and that doesn't necessarily mean through the finishing phase. It depends on what I want to accomplish, right? So I could own them through a backgrounding phase or part of a feeding phase, or all the way through, or partial ownership. But to do either of those options, I really need to think about it. And I'll throw in, we got to evaluate some of those costs and benefits. What else do I want to do to evaluate what are the best options for me to capture value? What would you guys recommend?
Well, one of the things that I think is important is to figure out what your options are. And that might be special calf sales. It might be retaining ownership a little bit longer. Talking to your neighbors, figuring out, just having the conversations of, because again, going back to some of that Ag Econ data coming out of K-State was some of my neighbors do get a better price than others. So how do they do that? What are their methods? And so get as much information as you can. I also agree with what you said before, is a lot of these things that we're talking about have an added cost. I own them longer, or I buy feed, or I buy health products. So you need to get the spreadsheet out or a piece of paper and really pencil out, what my additional costs are, what my additional potential income is. And so do the homework. And, for some of us, I really enjoy working with cattle. I don't necessarily enjoy being an accountant, or that would have been my career. But sometimes to really thrive as a cattleman, I need to do some of these other skills that are maybe not my favorite, but they're really important to long-term profitability.
Absolutely. And that'll help you evaluate some of those programs that are out there to figure out what's best for your ranch or your operation. That leads us to our Cattle Chat checklist this week, which is our ways to capture value on your calves.
Number 6, ensure adequate documentation on your procedures and processes that you've done to add value to your calves.
Number 5, visit with other producers that have used different methods.
Number 4, once you've selected a program, know all the procedures that you will need to do.
Number 3, calculate the potential costs and benefits for the practices you plan to undertake.
Number 2, understand what data you need to collect and record.
And number 1, determine the best mechanism for your ranch to capture value for your calves.
The other thing we wanted to address, and we had a really interesting, I'll say a graph that was put together, but it was based on some work that was done by some of our folks here at Beef Cattle Institute. Dr. David Amrine, who's our director of research here, and he works with a variety of students and faculty on different projects. This particular project, he was working with Blaine Johnson, who's a PhD student in DVM, looking at death loss in the feed yard by different causes. And Bob, I want to pick your brain a little. What did you learn from this research? And maybe you may start by telling us how many cattle were involved or how much data were involved in looking at these numbers.
Well, one of the things that's really neat about this research is that it is able to cover a lot of cattle over a fair amount of time and a fair amount of geographic area. So it's a good average of what really happened. So we're talking about over 4.5 million head of feedlot cattle in this database that was looked at over a few years. So you've got different times of year, different feedlots. And the reason I keep emphasizing that is any group of cattle can have a pattern that is, it's their own pattern. But when you add them all together, you really get an understanding of what feedlot cattle in general do. And some of the results were a little bit surprising to me. One that was not surprising to me was respiratory disease tends to be the biggest part of that disease problem is in the first 2 months. So we've had more than half of our cases that we're going to have by the time the calves have been in the feedlot for 2 months. And that's kind of the earliest peak. It's the disease we're going to see most frequently in those first 2 months at a feedlot. And then after that, it's certainly the risk doesn't go away to zero, but it declines pretty markedly after those first couple of months. That's different than some of the other disease issues that we see. Then they become equally important to respiratory disease as you move past those first 2 months.
So you're saying the first 2 months, about half the respiratory deaths occur, and then the other half of those deaths occur from 2 months till the end of the feeding period, which may be a couple hundred days.
Yeah. So definitely front end, first couple of months is where the greatest risk is. But that's different than some of the other diseases we think about. When you think about some of the other things that can cause health problems in feedlot cattle, that includes digestive issues such as bloat, those types of things. That tends to be not so much, well, it's not the front end emphasis. It's a little bit more even. So actually, once the cattle get up on feed after they've been there for 3 or 4 weeks, their risk of some of these digestive diseases is pretty flat after that time. So once they get up on full feed, their risk kind of plateaus out there. And so that kind of fits my bias, although sometimes it feels like those peak more late, and the peak of those digestive problems is pretty subtle. It's a fairly flat curve after you get out after that first month or so.
And Blaine has been doing some work on heart disease, and I know Bob Weber, you've been involved in some of that as well. What did you see when you looked at the kind of knowing that heart disease is a pretty low number, right? It's not a high percentage of the cattle, but just relative to the timing, we've talked about that being kind of late. What do you see here?
Yeah, I was a little surprised when I saw the chart. I was expecting sort of a hump towards after 150 days on feed or so. Kind of what you hear anecdotally out in the country about when we observe those heart deads in feeding environments. Now, we know there's some seasonal effect, but this days on feed number, after really they're on feed about a month or so, I mean, it's flat as a pancake, and not a high incident event, fairly low, but obviously not zero, and really flat through, basically 25 to 175 days on feed. Really not much difference on a day-to-day risk sort of perspective. So kind of surprising.
That's K-State's Bob Weber, Bob Larson, and Brad White of the Beef Cattle Institute. Again, we'd urge you to take in the entire BCI Cattle Chat podcast for this week. It's at ksubci.org. And this is Agriculture Today.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128 plus people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
You're tuned in to Agriculture Today from the campus of Kansas State University. Eric Atkinson here. Next up for you, today's agricultural news headlines. These courtesy in part of DTN. The USDA's crop production and World Agricultural Supply and Demand Estimates reports, released on Friday, featured a much sharper fall in U.S. and world soybean stocks than traders had expected, and a greater than expected decline in harvested acres of both corn and soybeans. The USDA's Gary Crawford reports.
There should not be too many surprised traders today after looking at the latest USDA crop reports. Most of the estimates at least within the range of what had been expected. For corn, the USDA says growers are harvesting what could be a 14.7 billion bushel crop, 1% lower than the projections a month ago, 8% bigger than last season. Lower production will lead to lower ending stocks than expected, so USDA upping its corn price forecast by a dime to an average $3.60, which would be 4 cents higher than this past season. Soybeans, USDA also taking 1% off its previous forecast, now estimating a 4.27 billion bushel crop, still up 20% from last season, very close to what traders expected. They may not have expected USDA to forecast soybean year-ending stocks to be only 290 million bushels. That's down near the bottom of trade expectations, and it's about 37% lower than the USDA forecast last month. USDA analyst adding 55 cents to the previous price forecast, now expecting beans to average $9.80 a bushel, $1.23 higher than this past season. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
As for the Kansas numbers in that crop production report, again, these are based on October the 1st conditions. The state's 2020 corn production is now forecast at 788 million bushels. That would be down 2% from last year's production. The acres to be harvested, 5.75 million. That's down 4% from a year ago. And the corn yield forecast at 137 bushels per acre, up 4 bushels from last year. Grain sorghum forecast at 237 million bushels, up 16% from last year. The acreage to be harvested, 2.76 million, up 15% from 2019. And the yield is forecast at 86 bushels per acre. That's up a bushel from last year. Soybean production is forecast at 209 billion bushels. That would be up 12% from last year. Acreage harvested, 4.75 million acres, up 6%. And the yield forecast at 44 bushels per acre, up 2.5 bushels from last year. Also, cotton production forecast at 320,000 bales. That's up 14% from last year. Harvested acreage at 195,000. That's up 44,000 acres from last year. And the yield forecast at 788 pounds per acre, down 102 pounds per acre from a year ago. Alfalfa hay production, 1.7 million tons, down 33% from last year, with acreage harvested at 530,000. That's down 16% from a year ago. The yield at 3.2 tons per acre, down just shy of a ton from last year. All other hay production, 3.9 million tons, up 4% from last year, with harvested acreage at 2.2 million. That's up 33% from a year ago. And all other hay yield of 1.8 tons per acre. That's down 0.5 ton from 2019. Now, the USDA October crop reports show how tighter stocks are affecting other aspects of the crop balance sheets, as we hear in this report from the USDA's Stephanie Ho.
What was the new information in USDA's latest crop reports?
In October is a little bit unique because we also incorporate the whole tranche of information that we got on September 30th, and that's the grain stocks report and the small grains summary.
That was World Ag Outlook Board Chair Mark Czekanowski.
The biggest surprises came on September 30th when the stocks report kind of implied much tighter supplies for, all of the major grains and oilseeds, corn, soybeans, wheat.
He says the tighter stocks were relatively unexpected, but have now been included in the balance sheets. For example, with wheat.
Now we're forecasting for the new crop year the lowest stocks in 6 years. So, I think that's pretty noteworthy.
Tighter expected stocks in wheat, corn, and soybeans means higher expected prices. This is Stephanie Ho for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
One USDA economist notes that China has stepped up purchases of almost every U.S. agricultural product, and some of those percentage increases are huge. Again, here's Gary Crawford.
We only have official complete ag trade numbers for the first 11 months of the 2020 fiscal year, October through August. In that time, our total U.S. ag exports to China amounted to $14.2 billion worth, 52% more than for the same time frame in 2019. USDA economist and trade tracker Bart Kenner says of that $14 billion, a little under $5.5 was from soybean sales.
Soybean exports to China are up 17%.
But wait till you hear some of the huge percentage increases for some other U.S. products China has been buying. For example,
pork exports are up 327%. Corn is up 634%. Wheat and poultry products are both up.
Up, hardly the word for those. Those actual numbers fairly small, but the percentage increase is massive. For U.S. wheat, China's purchases up by about 2,570%. U.S. poultry sales to China up almost 2,700%. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
Elsewhere in the headlines today, a part of a visit to North Carolina by USDA Secretary Sonny Perdue last week was a violation of the Hatch Act when he urged those at the Mills River, North Carolina event that they could get 4 more years of the, quote, decider-in-chief, as he described him, if they voted for President Trump. This according to the U.S. Office of Special Counsel. They said that there will be no disciplinary action against Perdue if he reimburses the government for the travel costs that were paid by the U.S. Treasury. The law generally bars federal employees from engaging in political activities while on duty, but does exempt the president and vice president. The Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington brought that complaint against the secretary. And the USDA has published the final rule for the Conservation Stewardship Program, which makes changes to the program called for under the 2018 Farm Bill. It also reflects the more than 600 comments that were received on the initial rule for the program. The USDA said that the reduced funding for the program could result in higher environmental benefits, since the focus will be on those CSP efforts that provide a higher degree of environmental results. Once more, as we approach the break, if you happen to miss our broadcast on any given day and would like to hear a replay, those are archived each day on this web address, agtoday.net. That's agtoday.net. You can also find out about the automatic download of the broadcast in podcast form to your mobile device right there at agtoday.net. You're listening to Agriculture Today.
Did you eat today? Thank a farmer. A way to get more involved in agriculture is through 4-H and FFA. Through 4-H and FFA, we have been given multiple opportunities to grow as leaders and learn more about agriculture.
You can learn skills related to jobs, public speaking skills, and you get the opportunity to travel around the country and meet new people.
If you want more information about getting more involved in 4-H and FFA, visit them on their websites at kansasffa.org and kansas4h.org.
Welcome back, and thanks for joining us on Agriculture Today. Along with Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. The new 4-H year is beginning, and that means many youth are visiting a 4-H club for the very first time. As part of its effort to welcome new and existing members, Southeast Area Kansas 4-H Youth Development Specialist Beth Hinshaw says there's a welcoming guide on the 4-H website to help clubs create an environment that supports and encourages its members. Beth, we're starting the new 4-H year. It means a lot of new faces in those clubs and organizations. And one of the things we want to focus on today is just how to make everyone feel welcome in 4-H.
Yes, that's exactly right, Jeff. It is the new 4-H year. And so we know this is the time of year when people visit 4-H and they make those decisions about joining 4-H. So, a lot of clubs will have a new family coordinator, somebody to really work with those new families. But the thing we want everybody to realize is that everybody in the 4-H club has a role helping welcome new members. And so clubs need to develop a plan and figure out a way that they're going to support new members when they're interested in 4-H and to help them get acquainted and feel comfortable.
I know it seems like it always starts with kind of a smile and a handshake, maybe not a handshake this time because of COVID, but there are some things we can do that just kind of set the tone right off the bat.
Yeah, exactly. And, one of the things we talk about is, having a greeter at your 4-H club meetings. And again, we're probably not shaking hands and we may not exactly see the smile, But if, people come in and you try to get acquainted with them and help them find a place to sit and kind of explain what's going to happen in the club meeting, that goes a long way. One of the resources that we've had a committee working on, it's kind of a group of resources called the Kansas 4-H Club Corner, and you can find that on our website. But one of them is a 4-H greet sheet, and it's an actual piece of paper that you could hand to a new family that is visiting your 4-H club to help them understand, what's going to happen at the club meeting. Typically, we have some group decisions that are made and some kind of business meeting. There's usually some kind of program, maybe a speaker from the community or talks and demonstrations. And then there's also some kind of group building that happens. And that might be recreation or, activities that the kids get to be involved in. And it also has the 4-H Club Pledge and other information and vocabulary about 4-H. So that's one of those pieces that can be really helpful to a new family to understand what's going on.
I think we know that there's that kind of anxiety that builds up when you're in a new situation, something that you're not used to, and something that can help you ease into it is very much appreciated.
Most definitely. And you're right. We all feel that anxiety. So we want people to feel welcome at our 4-H clubs. And, what I always say is, let's figure out how we're going to put out the welcome mat. And that's usually not just one thing, but it's a lot of things that we need to do.
Seems like a lot of them I remember from when my son was in 4-H, where they would kind of do an icebreaker question to get everyone talking and involved, and that always helps.
Yes, at a 4-H club meeting, we like it when young people have an opportunity to say something. So one of those things that you hear at a 4-H club meeting is their roll call. And the roll call is always something that everybody gets to stand up and answer out loud. And it's something specific to them, their favorite flower, their favorite sports team, what have you. But it gives everybody an opportunity to stand up and be heard.
This also extends to the families as well, because they're really kind of part of the group as well.
Definitely. We want not only the young people to feel comfortable there and welcome, but their parents or other family members as well. And that's really why it's everybody's job in the 4-H club to help new people feel welcome and included. Our 4-Hers, they know the ropes, and so they can certainly help people get acquainted and understand what's going on. The other thing that we know is inviting your friends to 4-H is a great way to grow the 4-H program. And so that's another avenue. Not only do you know 4-H, but you know these friends, and it might even be easier for you to introduce 4-H to them. But we can't just stop there, because other people have heard about 4-H and want to come and be a part as well.
The project areas help as well, because there's that kind of natural curiosity and interest in a subject, so that helps as well.
Yes, we're proud of the project work that our young people do, because it really allows a young person to find their spark or, find a passion around some kind of a subject matter, and then just really go all in learning about that. And so a lot of times that is what will bring a family to 4-H, is that they have a child who has such a great interest in something, and they've heard that 4-H is someplace they can learn more about it.
And we know that it really just takes one or two people to be super friendly to make somebody feel right at home.
Definitely. We want you to be friendly at the meeting. And, one of the things that I often talk about at officer training is, what do you do after the meeting? And that's that chance to say, hey, thanks for coming. Hey, I hope I see you next month. Or maybe even a friendly text to remind them of when the next meeting is, or even maybe a note from your 4-H club thanking them for being a guest.
Always seems like they try and get everyone involved, and that's what's really nice, is that it doesn't seem to be cliquish. Everybody is kind of all in on the projects.
Yes, we have a variety of young people, ages 7 to 18 in a club setting. And so, yes, they're all part of one big group. And they may be smaller groups for their projects, but again, just lots of opportunities.
I like the idea of the greet sheet, and again, they can find that online.
Yes, you sure can. That's under our 4-H resources. You'll see the Kansas 4-H Club Corner, and there's several other great resources there as well. But we know that lots of people visit 4-H clubs in October and November. So these are our big times to make people feel welcome and to invite people in to 4-H to come and be a part of what we're doing in Kansas 4-H.
And inclusion is a big part of 4-H, always has been.
Definitely. And our theme for National 4-H Week this year was Opportunity for All. You know, we want all young people to find a place and find ways to learn in the Kansas 4-H program. We have skills for young people that are going to last through their lifetime, and we hope they'll come and check it out.
That's Southeast Area Kansas 4-H Youth Development Specialist Beth Hinshaw. Again, more information on welcoming 4-H members and guests to club meetings can be found online at kansas4h.org. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman, and this is the K-State Radio Network.